Good evening, my name is Peter Waygain. You have seen me before. I am the Secretary of the Citizens for Direct Democracy. Now, one great concern of us all is, of course, our environment. And what has happened is that certain groups called conservation authorities have sprung up to deal with maintaining a good ecology. Now, I am going to discuss the specifics of what has happened in the city of Kawartha Lakes with Kawartha Conservation. So I am a bit suspicious as to what is actually happening, so I have called this set of slides Conservation, My Foot. Now, before we start, you must understand what a not-for-profit organisation is. And here is the handbook, and it's given out by the Ministry of the Attorney General. And in it you will find that anybody who's over the age of 18, who is not mentally challenged and is not bankrupt, can start a not-for-profit incorporation. And there are many of them in society today. Now, in that book, they give you an example of what an association might be. And this is the example taken directly from there. The objects of a ratepayers not-for-profit association might be drafted as follows. And they give this stuff here. The establishment and operation of a residents' association for the purposes of. And that piece, again, is taken directly from the handbook. Promoting the interests of the residents of the community of Kawartha Lakes. Carrying on research into problems connected with the mismanagement of public properties. It would be quite proper for people to create this kind of not-for-profit association. Now, in these organisations, they need money. So where does the money come from? And don't forget, if you start a not-for-profit organisation, you're really asking the question, we are in it for the money. We are in it really for high salaries. And where does it come from in the case of conservation authorities? The Trillium Foundation, the local municipalities, government agencies, and public donations. This is the source of the money which goes into a not-for-profit in this particular case, and remember, we're there for the money. So here it is. Here's a bag of taxpayers' money. And the not-for-profit organisation makes a nice little hole, and here it comes, and it pours into the not-for-profit money-changing machine. And what does it change it into? It changes it into executive salaries. It changes it into a part of this which is concerned only with fundraising. And then the professional services, because you really don't want to do any work, you'd much prefer to get somebody in to do the work for you. And any work you do should be planning and data gathering. You see, planning and data gathering can't really be measured. They can't ask questions, have you done enough planning? Is your planning good enough? Have you missed things? And what about data? Have you collected enough data? So these are the things that go on. Now up the top here is some useful work. But again, it is not done by these people. There it is. It's volunteers. From the inception of conservation authorities, the real grunt work, the putting in of trees, the clearing out of ditches, is done by volunteers. So this is the structure that we have, which takes money from our taxes into the money changing machine, into executive salaries, into fundraising, and these other things here. What happens if you don't do any of this stuff on top? Well, that's not really important. The key thing is to have somebody going back to here, persuading these people to throw money into the machine so that you get your executive salaries. That is the purpose of many not-for-profit organisations. So let's look specifically at where the money comes from. This is from the financial report of the City of Kawartha Lakes, the Conservation Authority. You notice that all this money here, capital project grants, levies, etc., all this stuff here is 80%, and that is straight tax money. It is true that some of the tax money comes from the rest of the province, but it's still taxation money. And down here we have a little bit from their own funds. These are the 6 municipalities involved: City of Kawartha Lakes, Brock, Cavan, and so on. Those 6 together pour the money into here. So that's our taxes going into this massive amount of taxation money, which in turn is poured into the Kawartha Conservation. $3.38 million. Now, this is specific now to the City of Kawartha Lakes. The city is being asked to pay almost $1 million in 2018, and that's been increased by $35,000. Now, the CAO has been questioned. In summarising the proposed budget, which is an increase, the Chief Administrative Officer said that wages and benefits have a significant impact on the budget. Now, if it is the wages and benefits that are significant, then that must be the most important thing they do. The most important thing they look after is not conservation, it's after wages and benefits. He goes on. The proposal includes 1.5% cost of living increase and a merit increase. And that just inflames me completely. I have no idea how they measure merit. I have no how they measure a difference in merit. I have no idea how they relate that merit increase to money. And moreover, most of us has gone through our own life without any merit in pay of any kind. And having said that, what is merit? Does this mean that they have hired people who don't have enough merit? And if they have hired people who don't have enough merit and should be improved, then why did we hire them in the first place? This is despicable. Now, as well as that, the Kawartha Conservation is looking at several contract positions. They've contracted out their work, and they have these currently 9 contract positions. And they make the argument that since these people have been contracted out and they're still there, that they should be considered for permanent employment. Permanent employment of these contracted workers. But that is a typical step taken by bureaucracies. You can get rid of contracted workers, you can't get rid of permanent employees. This is a classic example of bureaucratic empire building. Permanent employees are almost impossible to remove. All services will erode their wear down to nothing in order before any of them lose their jobs. That's the same situation as in the City of Kawartha Lakes. Once employed by the City of Kawartha Lakes, you're there forever. Now, before we get into expenditures, let us understand what an expenditure is. An expenditure is a payment in cash or barter credits. Evidence of the documentation triggered by an expenditure is a sales receipt or an invoice. This is from their report. So, municipal agreements are expenditures. General benefit and projects are expenditures. They have all these things down here. They're not expenditures at all because there is no sales receipt. In fact, there is nobody to invoice. For general benefit and projects, who do you invoice? Who do you pay the money to? And who do they bill? These are, in fact, a breakdown of where they have spent their time. And that is not a bad thing to do. It happened when I was in the Ministry of Education. We decided to find out how much time we spent in schools, in school boards, and so on. So that may be interesting, but they are not expenditures. So I looked at that last figure and I said to myself, there is something wrong with it because the corporate services are this much money. I said, well, perhaps the corporate services really means the administrative costs. So I said, well, there it is, and they got 23 employees. So you do the division and you come up with 27,000. Now we know that the average salary for the people, the 23 people, is not 27,000. It is much, much more than that. Because in there, you have a CAO, 3 directors, 1 manager, 3 coordinators, and 15 others. So it clearly means that this number here is not the actual administrative costs. Corporate services does not mean administrative costs. So I tried to make sense of this. I got the audited report, and this is the audited report which covers expenditures, and this is the annual report that covers expenditures, and I tried to correlate these two things, and I found it completely impossible. There are conservation lands and expenditures. I think that probably means they bought some. That's an important thing. It's not in the annual report at all. And so it goes on. So these two things do not agree in any way. They make absolutely no sense. Where are the receipts in any case? Source water protection receipt, please show me. Now, by applying a certain amount of pressure, I actually got this total. It's not in either of the reports. That figure is not there. But as you can see, it's over $2 million of taxpayers' money are paid to maintain the 23 people on staff. This is 62.4% of the revenue. So that tax money is keeping these people in nice jobs, in nice conditions, and we have to ask the question, what on earth can we do? What do they do for that? Now, there's no way to actually extract the true cost, except that they happen to give it to us, but we would like to know these things as well. The names of the employees, their positions, their salaries. And don't forget that these people are being paid for by us. They work for us. And there's nothing wrong with us having this information. And in addition to these salaries, they pay the matches the owners' pension plans. So we pay them the salaries and we contribute to their pension plans. So what do we get for that? It's a sum over $3 million a year, and that's been going on for years and years and years. At least 10 years of that. So we're looking at sort of like $30 million over the last 10 years. This is what we get. We get studies and we get reports. We get large reports, glossy reports, expensive reports. But do they do anything for conservation? This is an example of a report for Balsam and Cameron Lakes. This is the thing called a characterization report. It really means gather the data, count the fish and count the weeds and count everything else and put it in chart after chart after chart. You end up with 169 pages, 62 tables, 61 figures, 155 references. Now, I've read a lot of scholarly dissertations in my time, and I have never seen one with 155 references. When you take out all this stuff, actually, there's not much in it. Now, this one says, with all this information, what should we do? This is the management plan. We'll have some looks at that later on. So, they have this word deliverables. In other words, that's something that they're supposed to be delivered to us, the people who pay for it. Conduct research. We're going to have a bit more research on potential. Research on potential things, not real things, potential things, echo changes, etc. Investigate options for predictive modelling. We're going to investigate options, for heaven's sake, for predictive modelling to help them do their job. We're going to conduct more research. And we're going to do some vulnerability assessment. I just love that, vulnerability assessment. And here we have more research. Research, investigate, research, assessment, research. Now this kind of research will take decades, it will cost millions, and it will support what is already known by common sense. And it would, of course, keep the Kawartha Conservation employees well paid and happy into the distant future. Now, this is just the beginning. This is the number of areas they have decided to look at. They virtually finished the characterization report and the management report for Balsam Lake. All these have not been done. Head Lake has been started. Head Lake and Rush Lake, they're very small lakes. The water quality actually in both of them is excellent. Now, it took 3 years to produce a draft plan. That plan came out about a month ago. And the public had 4 weeks to respond. So 3 weeks. Why didn't they ask the people before they started? On page 32, there are 10 entries identifying the action place will appear sometime. In other words, they've produced a report, but they haven't decided on the action plan. So, and this is a direct quote. Undertake responsible management. I love that when they put words like that in. Why don't they say undertake irresponsible management? The word responsible is completely redundant. Of septic systems, including routine inspections along the shoreline properties. And that they have in the report in red, and that's why I put it here. And that action plan is action plan A1, and it's going to appear on page X, but we don't know where page X is. How? But long before Kawartha Conservation existed, we had the Ministry of the Environment, and it still exists. Look what they said. However, there are several indications of minor bacteria pollution sources generally within the areas of the inlets, etc., etc. That was in 1972. We're now 40 years on, and nobody has identified where this is and stopped it. Your question is, why not? So, we must set quantifiable criteria for Kawartha Conservation that will measure the effectiveness of this. So we want to see some practical measures, some measurements. So we can say, okay, Kawartha Conservation, you must maintain the oxygen level at this much, or better. You must increase the fish population to this amount. You must keep the turbidity values below that amount. You must keep the weedy areas less than 10%. So we can actually make measurable, quantifiable elements here, which we can go back and say, well, you didn't reach it, did you? Or you did reach it, good job. Then Kawartha Conservation must be obliged to reach those criteria. Now I found out as I was reading this, and I'm one of the few people that actually read this stuff, that they were taking the dissolved oxygen in the water throughout the summer months. But they never took one in midwinter. And the problem is, of course, that any fisherman knows that the winter kill occurs mainly under the ice in the deep water where there's no oxygen at all. It would have been interesting to have the dissolved oxygen profile in January or February, but it's not there. So we see that Kawartha Conservation is mainly concerned with ecological research, collecting data, producing reports, educational brochures. Now what we need, the people, is on environmental protection. We know what the problems are. We've known them for decades. The fishing is poor. The walleye have been decimated. The annual algal blooms make swimming dangerous. The massive proliferation of weeds makes boating difficult. These are the problems that we need to have addressed. And you don't address them by gathering data, you address them by doing something about them. So, environmental management is not rocket science. The Kawartha Conservation Watershed does not include major industries. We don't have problems with big polluters from chemical plants. So all we need to do is to stop chucking stuff into the water. Everybody knows that. That is not a matter of research. That is called common sense. And what is chucked into the water? Well, fertilizers, oily stuff from roads, garbage, septic tank leaks, sewage, pesticides, and so on. We know that these things should not be thrown into the water, and if we stop throwing them into the water, we would still have a problem because we've still got to clean it up. So, what can we do about those current problems? So presume that we stop the people throwing stuff into the water, what then can we do? Well, the first thing is we can identify the sources of pollution and who is doing it, and then we can get the Ministry of the Environment to prosecute. Let's put some teeth into the prosecution of people who pollute the water. Now, it is known that aquatic weeds contribute to the amount of nitrogen in the lake. By removing weeds, the water quality can be improved. Weed harvesting has an immediate effect on water quality. This is one thing which I've been fighting ever since I came to the Kawarthas. Removing weeds removes nutrients, it improves water quality almost immediately. This one is actually a photograph from when I lived in New Zealand of them removing weeds from one of the lakes in New Zealand, which, as you know, have wonderful trout in them. This is what should be done. And this came up about 15 years ago, right here in Kawartha Lakes. There was a movement to harvest the weeds, extract the biofuels, to dry the stuff that's left, and to sell it as compost for farmers and for gardeners. That almost got off as a mini green project, and it would be marvellous. It would done good, it would have created work for people, and it would be a very positive effect on the lakes. So, to minimise the number of algal blooms, we need to reduce the nutrients. Everybody knows that. Again, this is not rocket science. But what do we in fact have? A floodplain water body becomes colonised with emergent macrophytes. That emergent just means stuff that sticks up above the water, which may eventually cause it to disappear through an accumulation of silt and organic matter. Again, we know this. Anybody who's looked at the lower part of Pigeon Lake, we're almost here. We can almost walk across Pigeon Lake where 20 years ago it was open water. Now, what could we do with our money? Well, let's look at this. This is in Cardiff. It is a fish hatchery, and they spent this much money, and they've been open for about 12 years. So they spent this amount, about $122,000, and the yearly operating costs are about $3,000. Now we spend $3 million on Kawartha Conservation, so we could immediately do something about the depleted fish in our lakes. In fact, we could build 100 fish hatcheries for this cost. That would be something positive. This would be something that improves the lakes. This would be something that attracts visitors to this area. Another thing we could do is this. Our Member of Parliament, Jamie Smale, launched this project last year, and it's to bring back the walleye. What actually happened is local people who know the waters suggested that the disappearance of the walleye coincided with the introduction of things called bottom scrubbing hydraulic dams. And what they wanted to do was say, well, let's do something and see if this is true. But what does Jamie say? I am disappointed that after 8 years, the Peterborough Ministry Office has not accomplished any of the items outlined in its own management plan. All we wanted them to do was to do a simple test to see if changing this would in fact increase the number of walleye. A little piece of simple science, and this is something that Kawartha Conservation should have got behind vigorously. This is to explain it in very simple terms. Here is a dam, here is the water, the red stuff is warm water, the blue stuff is cold water, and this line here is the dissolved oxygen. As you get towards the top, you get more dissolved oxygen, so naturally fish like to be in this area here. But what has happened is they have now gone from over the top dams. This water would run over the top and go down the rest of the river to the lakes, and it'd be nice, warm, highly oxygenated water. But they didn't do that anymore. They opened the dam here. So all this cold water, full of muck from the bottom of the lakes, with almost no oxygen, that goes down, and the small crustacea, they all die. This is the situation of Bobcaygeon Dam. And Bobcaygeon Dam is unique because it still has part of it with the logs on the top. So in Bobcaygeon, we could do this experiment. We could stop doing this and we could start doing that, and after 3 or 4 years we could say, do we or do we not have more walleye? Now, Ontario seems to have neglected the most fundamental of all responsibilities, protection of the city from the bureaucrats. The big problem with our life state is bureaucrats. Now this is Bob Patterson, and he is the legal advisor to the Ontario Land Owners Association. And he says, people, watch out for Bill 139 and its impact on conservation authorities, because there is an organisation called Conservation Ontario, and they are a lobby, and they're formed by the conservation authorities, and they want permission, legal permission, to consolidate and enlarge the existing areas. And two, the conservation authorities have more power when issuing or refusing permits. That would be in 139. And conservation authority officials may have permission to enter any land situated in the authority's area for the purpose of determining compliance. And that is the whole of the watershed. Most of the city of Kawartha Lakes would be involved. So they can come tramping onto your land under the pretext of seeing whether you are in compliance or whether you are not. This is a police state. Now we all know this because I've spoken about bureaucracy before. Their objective is to grow so large, to have so many laws for self-protection, to cost so much, and to create a government structure so rigid that they become invincible. They are unassailable by anyone, even by the governments that allows them to exist. Now we have witnessed, I personally, because I was in education, the collapse of the educational system when school boards were amalgamated. We have seen the destruction of communities, the end to wise fiscal management, and the gagging of public opinion when municipalities were amalgamated. The school boards are amalgamated, municipalities are amalgamated. So here comes another one, the amalgamated conservation authorities. This must be stopped. And because they will be able to pass legislation to require municipalities to financially support conservation authorities. At the present time, municipalities have the choice whether to support them or not, and how much to give. And once they are entrenched, we won't be able to get rid of them. We should also note that conservation authorities define their own salaries, working conditions and benefits in the same way as other not-for-profit organisations. And just as a footnote to remind me to say this, this was the headlines in the Toronto Star. They're concerned about Toronto Hydro, the CEO, getting $1 million. And they're saying, well, who controls them? Who says what they should get and what they should do? And the answer is, they say what they should do and what they should get. The public is not in it. Now, there is a way out of this, because right now, in the Conservation Act, we still have this clause: dissolution of an authority. An authority shall call a meeting of the members of the authority to consider the dissolution of the authority, if, by resolution, the councils of 2 or more participating municipalities request that meeting. This is our way out, and I'm hoping that our council, or at least some of the councillors, will push for this dissolution of the Kawartha Conservation Authority and its return to a truly volunteer organisation with financial support for actual concrete changes to our local environment. Thank you. Well, if you gathered that I am not happy with what is happening to conservation in this area and its huge cost, then I hope you took something away from this set of slides. I hope you also will like this and support the citizens for direct democracy in any way that you can. It would be very much appreciated because we have very large foes.